Basics. There are a lot of similarities between jazz theory and traditional Western classical theory, and you may find that knowledge gained from courses such as A-level music or grade 5 theory can be applied in jazz theory too. That said, there are differences, some which you'll have to get used to, some which are semantics, and some which are just quirks of jazz theory. So let's have a look at some of the fundamentals. The first idea, and one that you're going to keep coming back to, is the cycle of fourths. The circle or cycle of fourths is a tool that you'll be using a lot when we look at the vast majority of material within this course. You're probably aware of the cycle of fifths, which goes in the opposite direction to the cycle of fourths. The circle of fifths is often used as a technique to teach key signatures. However, going the other way, along the circle of fourths, is a much easier way of learning and implementing functional harmony. This is because the circle of fourths gives us dominant harmonic motion. This means that every step is chord 5, or the dominant, of the next step. Most, if not all, jazz standards rely heavily on the understanding of dominant motion. There's a copy of the cycle of fourths at the beginning of your handbook. You shouldn't underestimate how important this will be throughout the course. Chords. Chords and chord sequences are the lifeblood of jazz music. Being able to understand, apply and interpret chords correctly will give you access to the vast majority of jazz compositions. Jazz chords are described via chord symbols. Let's look at some of the basic and most common chord symbols. The first chord we'll look at is the major 7 chord. There are a few chords that can mean the same thing but can be represented by different symbols. Both these symbols mean a major 7 chord, except one has Maj 7 and the other has triangle 7. Both these ways of writing the symbols are common and both are perfectly acceptable. Therefore we have X major 7. Now obviously X isn't a real musical note. You can swap X for any of the notes of the chromatic scale to give you a proper chord. So here's a couple of examples. Here we have C major 7 or G major 7. Whilst the spelling of the symbols are different, they both mean the same thing, a major 7 chord. So now you can identify a major 7 symbol. Let's see how a major 7 chord is constructed. Let's use the example C major 7. In jazz, you construct a basic chord by using 4 notes. Let's look at the root. The root is the bass note and gives the name for the chord. Next we have the third. In jazz, if it's a major third, we don't add anything to the chord spelling. This is really important. The third, or a major third, does not need representing in the chord spelling. The Maj, or the triangle 7 sign in the chord spelling, does not relate to the third. In fact, unless told otherwise, we always assume there's a major third in the chord symbol. So to be clear, if you have a major third in your chord, you don't need to add anything to the chord spelling about it. The fifth. As with the third, unless we've altered the fifth, we don't need to add anything into the chord spelling about it. The seventh. In jazz, we call the leading note, or the natural 7th, a major 7. This is then reflected in the chord symbol as Maj 7 or triangle 7. So we can confirm that the Maj 7 in the major 7 chord reflects the 7th, not the 3rd. Here's what the chord sounds like. We'll learn more about the function of this chord later on in the course, but for the time being we think of it as a 1 major 7, a root chord, or sometimes a 4 major 7. The next chord we'll be looking at is another very common chord, the dominant 7 chord. So it's written as the note name, here represented as an X, with a 7 next to it. Remember, X can be any of the 12 notes. So an example here is B flat 7. Let's have a look at how you construct a dominant 7 chord. So for our example, we'll be looking at C7. First is the root, or the bass note, which gives the chord its name. Next is the third. The third is a major, or unaltered third. As with the previous chord, the major 7, we don't need to add anything to the chord symbol to reflect this. The 5 is a perfect fifth, and therefore we don't need to do anything to the chord symbol. Next, the 7th. The 7th is flattened. In jazz, if you have a 7 without the Maj next to it, it always means flattened 7th. So in the key of C, B flat is the flattened 7th, which is reflected in the chord symbol by just adding a 7. Let's listen to C7. 7 chords are better known as dominant 7 chords and are used as chord 5-7. The next chord we'll look at is another very common chord. It's the minor 7 chord. You can see from our example here, you can spell it as either X minor 7 or X with a minus sign 7. It's probably better to use the min or min 7 as it's clearer and sometimes the line doesn't work as well. So let's swap the X for a real note. Here's F sharp minor 7 or A flat minor with a minus sign 7. Let's take a look at how it's constructed. Here's C minor 7. Let's start with the root. The root's the bass note and gives the chord its name. Next, the third. The third is a flattened third, so therefore we add min or min in the chord symbol. So whenever you see min or min in your chord symbol, you know it has a flattened third. Remember, if it's a major third, we don't do anything to the chord symbol. The 5 is a perfect fifth, so therefore we don't do anything to the chord symbol spelling. In a minor 7, the 7th is flattened, so we've added a 7 to the chord symbol spelling. Let's look at some of the other common chord types and how you use the chord symbols to spell them. Another common chord symbol is the minor with a major 7th. You can write it either as a min with a triangle 7 or minor sign with a major 7. The first of these spellings is the most common. In this example we have C minor major 7. The root, or bass note, is C. Then there is a minor third, which gives it the min in the chord symbol spelling, a perfect fifth, which doesn't affect the spelling, and a major 7th, which is therefore means we add the triangle sign or a maj sign to the chord symbol spelling. This is what it sounds like. This chord is normally used as a root chord in a minor cadence or a 1 chord in minor harmony. Another common chord is what's known as the half diminished chord. It's called half diminished because half of the arpeggio is diminished. However, it's better practice to call it minor 7 flat 5, as this is more descriptive of the chord, as you'll find out later in the course. You can also write it as a circle with a slash through it, 7. The circle is the common symbol for diminished, so by adding a slash through the middle of the circle, it implies half diminished, and then we add our 7. So let's look at an example. Here's C minor 7 flat 5. The root is C and the bass note. Then there's a minor third, which is in the chord spelling, and also a flattened 7, which is expressed as a 7 in the chord spelling. The fifth is a flattened fifth, so therefore we add flattened fifth to the chord spelling. Notice that this is applied after the 7. There is a hierarchy to chord spelling. The third first, then the 7th, then any other alterations or extensions. Like many things in jazz theory, there are also conventions for chord placements, especially within jazz standards. If you're only working with one chord a bar, this is straightforward. When working with 2 chords in the bar, the convention, and 99% of the time, is to have them on beat 1 and beat 3. The slash signs after each chord indicates that the chord should be repeated again. This is very common practice in jazz. 3 chords in a bar are not as common as 2 and are generally used to set up or cadence towards the subsequent bar. Common practice is to put the quicker harmonic motion on beats 3 and 4. Here we see beats 3 and 4 of the first bar cadencing into G major. On most jazz standards, it's unlikely to see 4 chords in a bar unless it's a ballad. There are few fast tunes or even medium tunes with 4 chords in a bar. However, you can apply 4 chords in the bar when accessing substitutions, as we'll see in the course later on. Lastly, let's look at jazz speak. Jazz musicians tend to use different words when describing common techniques. Changes just means chord changes. This is one of the most common terms in jazz and can describe 3 chords in a row or the whole tune. Rhythm section players often talk about changes. A chorus is the whole of a form or the whole of the tune all the way through. Play a chorus means play the whole form once through. Play 3 choruses means play the form 3 times in a row. The head is simply the tune. Play the head means play the tune. A turnaround is a section that sets up a repeat, often back into an original key, sometimes into a modulation, but generally it's done through dominant harmony, or dominant motion, or the cycle of fourths, which we looked at earlier. Turnarounds are generally found at the end of 4, 8, or 16 bar phrases. Comping is short for accompanying and refers to the chords being played harmonically or rhythmically behind a soloist or the tune. This course doesn't look at comping in depth, but you'll be able to understand more about it as we will be looking at how to select notes to best describe chords and chord symbols. Making the changes. This means that somebody who's soloing, the soloist, can accurately describe chords through their choice of notes while soloing. In practice, this means that if there wasn't anyone in the rhythm section or any comping, you'd still be able to understand which chord the soloist is on due to the way in which they picked descriptive notes for that chord and how they approached things like cadences or turnarounds. An advanced soloist would also make musical use of things like extensions and other advanced techniques. So these are the basics. In the next video, we'll start looking at major key harmony.